Hello everyone, and welcome back to Occult Perspectives. So, while I am compiling notes currently for a couple of Gabriel videos, covering the Archangel Gabriel, we're going to get into some of the lore, the biblical lore, and more symbology for use in ceremonial magic. We'll kind of get into all the details and dive into that topic soon. But for now, I want to get back into the book of Raziel. And as I've learned, there are different versions of the book of Raziel. So the book that I ended up getting, and I've covered a little bit in videos prior, is the Sepher Raziel, or Sepher Raziel ha-Melakh, or ha-Melakh. I've seen it spelled a couple of different ways. And that differs from the Liber Salomonis, as I believe that's how it's spelled, or pronounced. I'll spell it for you here in a minute. I have so many notes in this book. The Sepher Raziel, or the full grimoire term, Sepher Raziel Liber Salomonis. So Liber, as you see many times with like Crowley documents, Liber. Salomonis, or Salomonis, Salomonis. And that's, of course, referring to Solomon in that name, even though it's spelled a little bit differently, a more ancient version of the spelling. So I'm actually going to go ahead and start, since I've covered this before, this version of the book of Raziel, and I also covered a little bit of Liber 420. We're going to jump into Liber 420 first, and talk about the Liber Salomonis version of the book of Raziel. And there are a couple of other notes in this book before we get to that part that I wanted to read. This is page 57 from Liber 420, Christianity and the Occult. As I have explored in more detail elsewhere, the Catholic Church suppression of the Gnostics and pagan sects included the use of psychoactive substances. This can be most pointedly seen in New Testament references to, quote, sorcery, which is translated from the Greek term pharmakia. That's where we get the word pharmacy from, a word where we get the modern term pharmacy, and which relates directly to the use of herbs in magical rites. Thus, not surprising, the use of these substances, often in combination with the beliefs they traveled with, was forced underground, becoming, quote, occult, meaning hidden. I thought this was an interesting little section too, if it's what I remember it. Yeah. Gnostic reversals, such as the turning of Yahweh into a demonic force, otherwise known as the demiurge, and the deification of the serpent, which was at times equated with Jesus, also brings to mind the secret rites the later witches were accused of, such as the Black Sabbath and the use of ointments. Okay, and that's all that I'll read there. I have another little footnote here. Hope everyone's doing well. I think we're in another Mercury retrograde right now, so things could be, seem a little turbulent, perhaps. Okay, here's another note that I have written down. The use of opium with philosophers such as Paracelsus is kind of an interesting thing. The idea that opium may have retained some of these names as it came into port from foreign lands, this is on page 478 of Liber 420, cannot easily be ruled out. More recently, in reference to a medical recipe from 1450, in regard to the ingredient apium, the Dictionary of Medical Vocabulary in English 1375 to 1550, has in brackets reading opium, but elsewhere uses it in reference to celery. Interesting. Thus, in some cases, the name apium may be seen as a reference to opium and not the wild celery it is often identified with. The context of the term in Sepher Raziel, Liber Salomonis, in the Book of Magic, however, as in seeing devils, etc., leans towards opium. But this is in no way certain, and the use of niscormo or henbane would have ensured a hallucinogenic potential in the fumigation recipe regardless. And I'm not going to read any more there, but a lot of this stuff is speculation as well. He's just saying the evidence tends to lean more towards what he was just saying. And here's a little section. I think this might be the last note that I read before going back and getting into the actual chapter on Liber Salomonis. As we know, Queen Elizabeth had a ceremonial magician, I believe it was her, Dr. John Dee. He was discussed in regards to references to fumigants. This is on page 482 of Liber 420. He was discussed in regards to references to fumigants, ointments, and elixirs in relation to mirror scrying, and who was a practicing magician at a time when the Book of Oberon and Sepher Raziel Liber Salomonis, both of which expound techniques invoking mirrors and cannabis, were in circulation. And then there's also a Shakespearean connection to all of this as well. I highly recommend, if you're into Western ceremonial magic and you want to know how that ties in with the ancient use of sacraments, such as cannabis and other substances in ancient times, and how it's kind of gone on down the line. This is a very interesting read. Very good. Very good material. I'll read this little excerpt real quick. This is As the Globe Guide to Shakespeare explains, so that's the name of the work. In the 16th century, the English mage John Dee, looks like he lived 1527 to 1608, expounded what sounds strikingly like Prospero's secret studies, describing the contemplative mind should deal speculatively in his own art, and by good means mount above the clouds and stars. So it sounds very much like, focusing on your own path and transcending things. Dee first gained reputation for sorcery at Cambridge, where his ultra-realistic stage effects for a performance scandalized audiences, and later became astrologer to Queen Elizabeth. Very interesting. There's a chapter in here, I just started reading it, I've never read the whole chapter. I had read it later material in this book, kind of skipped ahead, but chapter 20, it's called The Cabaret of the Phantasmagoria, and it's talking about all these special effects and stuff they used back then to basically make the audience seem that they were really raising people from the dead. It was connected to necromancy. Super interesting. We could do a video on that chapter sometime. That is something that you would be interested in. Than any of you would be interested in. So he was scandalizing audiences, later became astrologer to Queen Elizabeth, as well as being credited with the victory over Armada in 1588. He is supposed to have cursed the Spanish fleet. Wow, so his magic affected the whole, Armada. It's interesting when you start thinking about magic on that level of things. The most famous occultist of his age has also been interpreted as Shakespeare's original for Prospero. So, one of Shakespeare's works, Prospero. All right. So before I get into the actual chapter and some of the things that I've started to underline in the actual chapter, is chapter 15 in this book, the Sepher Raziel, cannabis, mirror magic, and crystal gazing. So it gets more it gets into more material than just Sepher Raziel. It talks about other books as well and different people that are associated with it, but we're just going to get into it a little bit in this video. And then I will also read some of what I underlined in the Sepher Raziel ha-Melakh. I do want to point out, if you've watched my other Archangel Raziel videos and you want to learn more about Archangel Raziel, I pretty much covered all the information I could from the videos that were available at that point. There is a new Raziel video. I think it's Mythology Folklore A to Z. Does a really good 5-minute video on Raziel, and there's a couple new things I learned about in that video. One of those things being that not only did, when the angels got jealous that the book of Raziel was given to Adam, or going to be given to Adam, it says that the angels stole it, for fear that Adam a lesser being would gain the knowledge of how to, basically bind the angels or whatever. So they threw it into the sea. Some say it was Archangel Raphael who was sent by God to retrieve the book and give it back to Adam. Some say it was a sea demon, which is actually one of the goetic demons, I believe, and I do not know the name of that demon, but I thought that was a very interesting note. And then there's another angel who's said to have supposedly, I think we probably talked about that in one of those previous videos. I can't remember what the name of the other angel is. It wasn't a major angel that we think of like Raphael. And another interesting note from that video was that Archangel Raziel was the one who was said to actually was going about exclaiming the birth of Christ, and is tied to the nativity, the whole Bethlehem thing, and that Hark the Herald Angels Sing is actually a psalm connected with Archangel Raziel. So I recommend you go and check out that video. It was posted 4 months ago. I feel like there's another interesting note from that I'm probably missing too, but I also feel that we've probably covered it in previous Archangel Raziel videos. So just wanted to throw that out there first. So I'm just going to go ahead and try to run through this, what I've underlined in this chapter, and just hit on some key things. In reference to what we have already stated about ancient and medieval use of topical preparations of cannabis and other drugs for magical and religious purposes, one of the most interesting references occurs in the 16th century grimoire Sepher Raziel, Liber Salomonis, where it is used for seeing spirits and devils in a magic mirror, often referred to as Sepher Raziel and also known as Liber Salomonis. It has 7 surviving versions in manuscript form, 7 known versions in manuscript form. I'm going to skip down to the bottom of the page. Even in the ancient, I'll back it up a little bit. This magical text was written in the Solomonic tradition, which also brought us the still popular Keys of Solomon, and both texts, which come from the same period, have been attributed to the ancient Hebrew king in an attempt to give them more authority. Even in the ancient world, Solomon was highly regarded for his knowledge of magic, as we have seen in the 1st through 3rd century, the Testament of Solomon, and its account of the king forcing a demon to spin hemp. So that's kind of interesting. As well, Solomon's legend figures into late traditions of Freemasonry, of course. Rumors which suggest the wise king left secret books of magic seem never to have died, nor have slumbered since ancient times, these rumors of these magical books. And indeed, we shall find a number of well-known Freemasons were in possession of this grimoire. As the Sepher Raziel Liber Salomonis records, I, Solomon, put such a knowledge and such a distinction and explanation in this book to every man that readeth or studieth it, that he know whereof he was and from whence he came. This is an excerpt from Sepher Raziel, 1564 edition. I think I covered everything on this page I wanted to. There's different manuscript numbers, so you know exactly which one's the correct one, but the 2 manuscripts for Sepher Raziel Liber Salomonis is MS 3846 and Sloane MS 3846 and 3826. And I know that in the back of this book, I don't know if we'll get to it today or not in the back, Maybe we'll jump straight to that, but there's a list of the different Raziel manuscripts. There's actually quite a few, and it kind of outlines, just a little summary of what that particular manuscript is about. So that's pretty helpful. Most 16th century manuscripts of magic remain unedited and unpublished, perhaps because the majority of them are dominated by liturgical conjuration. This is a style of magic that has attracted less academic attention than the Solomonic magic and Renaissance theurgy, perhaps because it is perceived as a hangover of the medieval period. However, liturgical demon conjuring is every bit as typical of early modern magic. Copiers of Solomonic magic texts like Sepher Raziel sought to return to purified form of conjuration drawn from Kabbalistic Jewish tradition supposedly passed down from Solomon himself at a time when Renaissance humanists were interested in recovering the Kabbalistic tradition. So there's two different traditions, it seems like, the traditional, calling forth of a demon or whatever, and then there's this liturgical. I'm not sure exactly I forget what the definition of that is, so I'm going to look it up real quick. Relating to public worship. So the magic is more of just worship based rather than trying to conjure forth demons and conquer them, it seems. Interesting. I could be wrong though. Let's go ahead and continue. Professor Benny Shannon, who has speculated about ancient Jewish use of psychoactive substances, felt somewhat vindicated when he was directed to the works of the medieval Kabbalist and scholar Rabbi Jacob ben Asher, who lived from 1255 to 1340, He writes that the purest of foods were created at the very beginning of creation in order to allow for the attainment of higher knowledge. He explicitly relates this to the biblical tree of knowledge and comments further that such higher knowledge can also be gained through the use of certain drugs and medicines available at his time. Clearly, cannabis and its various preparations, along with opium and other psychoactives, were well known for mystical properties at Ben Asher's time. In his De Occulta Philosophia in 1651, Agrippa, another philosopher, refers to how Rabbi Israel made certain cakes, writ upon with certain divine and angelical names, and so consecrated, which they did eat with faith, hope, and charity. That should sound familiar. Faith, hope, and love did presently break forth with the spirit of prophecy. Here's something interesting. We read in the same place that Rabbi Joanna, the son of a name I can't pronounce, Jochahad, did after that manner enlighten a certain rude countryman named Eleazar. This might be the Eleazar Worms that is one of the possible authors, definitely one of the writers of the modern book of Raziel, being altogether illiterate, that being compassed about with a sudden brightness, did unexpectedly preach such high mysteries of the law to an assembly of wise men, that he did astonish all that were near him. This is Agrippa in 1651 writing this. A description that indicates more than sigils on cakes were in use, although the ingredients of said cakes are not included. Like the Zoroastrian royalty and priesthood, as well as the Levites, there are indications that early Kabbalists enjoyed the use of the herb, but prevented its consumption by the common people. And we've seen this theme before. In the Sham Ravier Huda, says it is good to eat the essence of hemp seed and Babylonian broth, but it is not lawful to mention this in the presence of an illiterate man, because he might derive a benefit from the knowledge not meant for him. Interesting. Other sources have noted a Kabbalistic comparison to the effects of cannabis with divine perception, noting an intriguing reference to cannabis in the context of a fleeting knowledge of God. That wasn't even something I had underlined, but that was something that was kind of called out to me. As we saw in chapters 1 through 3, use of cannabis-infused wines goes back to ancient times in the Mideast. References from Zoismos to cannabis-infused wines, heavily influenced by Jewish sources in his writing on alchemy. They also talk about there's an era of Merkava mysticism, which ranged from 100 to 100 to 1000 AD, centered on the sort of visionary experiences had by the Old Testament prophet Ezekiel, who, as we saw earlier, came to his experience through eating a, quote, scroll. And this almost reminds me of the kind of the Elder Scrolls, but here they're talking about some sort of substance that he probably ingested. Aaron Light believes Merkava mysticism held a strong influence over the later Western magical tradition. The Merkava's use of ritual drugs. Its focus upon the talismans and seals, the summoning forth of angelic gatekeepers, and the gaining of mystical visions are elements that run throughout the Grimoire spells. Leitch, 2005. I'll go ahead and read this little bit too. This looks a little interesting. And a lot of this, he kind of jumps around in this book. We haven't really jumped into Liber Salomonis yet, and how all of, the cannabis and the magic mirrors and all that, crystal gazing, are directly associated with that. We'll probably get into that in the next video, because in a minute I'm going to jump over to this and read some of what I've underlined here. This will be an ongoing video series, because this book it's huge. It has so much reference material, so much information compiled into one book. And the book of Raziel, it's probably the most advanced read that I've ever read. I have so many notes in here, things I've underlined that I've had to go back and remember the associations. There's something associated with each letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So Aleph is ox. And there's also a number correspondence as well. So trying to remember some of the letter correspondences so you can understand the deeper mysteries when they start using the Hebrew letters together. And this goes kind of in line with gematria. So I'm gonna go ahead and read just a little bit more here. That cannabis might have played a role in such forms of Jewish mysticism is indicated by references to it well into the late medieval period, and another interesting reference can be found with Rabbi Beryl Wine, written and lectured extensively on Jewish history. He connected the use of hashish with the Kabbalistic-inspired Jewish Messianic movement of the 17th century. He refers to the Moroccan Jew Joseph ben Zur, that name sounds really familiar to me, who is popularly identified with the prophesied messianic figure Messiah ben Joseph, a claim that was propped up by Rabbi Elisha Ashkenazi, and thousands of Jews in Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia believed this and followed Joseph as a result. So it seems like it was a pretty large movement. According to Wayne, Joseph ben Zur was probably mentally unstable. At the very least, though, he was guilty of a very prevalent habit in the Middle East, smoking hashish. Now, smoking hashish in the 17th century was not seen in the same negative light as the modern world views it. Nevertheless, Joseph ben Zur was both slightly touched and usually high, which together is a lethal combination. He claimed he saw a vision when an angel came to him and said that he was the Messiah ben Joseph. This was written by Wine in 2000. Not sure if it's Ween or Wine, W-E-I-N, 2013. This scenario of scrying under the influence of cannabis fits with both the suggestion of cannabis in the Kabbalistic writing referred to, as well as the confirmed use of cannabis for scrying in the Kabbalistic-inspired Sepher Raziel, Liber Salomonis, which was composed in the same time period. is the occult writer A.E. Waite. That name pops up all the time. Explained of Sepher, Raziel, Liber, Salomonis. It is an English translation of a Latin original and purports to have been sent to Solomon by a prince of Babylon, who was greater and more worshipful than all men of his time. Because Solomon was so greatly revered. I'm assuming they're talking about Solomon. It was the prince of Babylon who sent him the original text. Greater and more worshipful than all men of his time. The whole connection of worshipful master in a Masonic lodge with King Solomon. There is a very large connection there. And worshipful comes from an older English term, worshipful. It means worthy of respect. Alrighty. So I'm going to go ahead and take a break from this book. We're going to jump over to Sepher, Raziel, ha-Melakh. I'm going to go in the back real quick where all the different manuscripts are, though. Here's the appendix. As you can see, here's one manuscript here, here's another one, and it looks like there's about, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different ones. So I'm going to go ahead and read the 2 on the Sepher Raziel. So British Library Manuscript Sloane 3826. Liber Salomonis called Sepher Raziel, containing 7 treatises. The first is said clavis, for that in it is determined astronomy and of the stars, and they spell stars interestingly. It's S-T-A-R-R-E-S. So 2 R's and an E. For without them we may do nothing. So astronomy and astrology. The second is said Allah, spelled A-L-A, Allah, perhaps, for that in it is determined of the virtues of some stones, of herbs, and of beasts, and even virtues is spelled archaically, V-E-R-T-U-E-S. The third is said Tractatus Thymiamatus. See, that's why this book is kind of a difficult read. For that there is determined in it of suffumigations and of allegations, of them and divisions. The suffumigations, though, that makes me think of the Oracle of Delphi. If you look that up, the fumes, they would come up from the ground, and the priestess would have these visions. A very interesting subject. The fourth is said the Treatise of Times. Times as in the plant. And the herb of the day, the hour, it's spelled here, H-E-E-R-E, the hour of the day and of the night, for that in it is determined when anything ought to be done by this book. The fifth is said that the treatise of cleanness, and that's spelled strange too, for that there is determined in it of abstinence. There's a lot of power in purity, making sure your body's pure, alchemically aligning, drinking plenty of water, not drinking too much caffeine, which I'm often guilty of. Doing yoga, doing meditation, not staying up late and partying and all of those things. Being temperate. It adds to your magical power. It's very important. 6. The sixth is said Samaim, S-A-M-A-I-M, for in that treatise it nameth all the heavens and her angels and the operations of working of them. The seventh is the book of virtues, for that there is determined in it of virtues and miracles, for there be told the properties of the art of magic, and of his figures and of the ordinances of the same. There's some other things in it. The invocation of Oberion concerning psychic art, Liber Lunae, seems like something associated with the moon. Magical directions, the rule of the book of consecration, or the manner of working with some orisons. Interesting. So yeah, it doesn't really cover as much as I would have liked it to back here in the appendix, but I do remember that there was some interesting notes somewhere. Thank you for all of you who watch my videos too and are patient with me. I have so many notes just scattered all around my house. It's very just trying to find the things that are the most interesting, you know, jumping from book to book, video to video, trying to bring it all into one place. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning of this book. And I've only made it to about page 75 of this book of Raziel, the Sepher Raziel ha-Melakh. And I still have a lot to go, because there's about 280 pages, so a little more than a quarter of the way through. So some of this is going to be review from previous videos, so I apologize for that. But there's just so many little jewels of knowledge to be gained from these kind of works, I think. And I will try to make the next video more interesting as well, because I didn't really get into much of the kind of the cool, like, crystal gazing and stuff, and of course that's referenced in a lot of movies, Hollywood and stuff, the crystal gazing, because a lot of people used it back then, and scrying and all these different effects for things like necromancy and all that. It's amazing the history of it, and the burning of various herbs and consummation of these things to have these visions and gain this knowledge. It's all very interesting history. So this is the translator's introduction. According to Hebrew legend, the Sepher Raziel was presented to Adam in the Garden of Eden. It was given by the hand of God through the medium of the angel Raziel. Spelled Raziel a lot in this, R-E-Z-I-A-L. It is therefore suggested that this is the first book ever written. The text is an extensive compendium of ancient Hebrew magical lore, and quite probably the original source for much traditional literature on angelic hierarchy, astrology, Kabbalah, and gematria. Sepher Raziel is sometimes titled Raziel ha-Melakh. That's this version of the book, and credited to Eleazar of Worms. Trachtenberg further states Sepher Raziel, probably compiled in the 13th century and containing much geonic, mystical material, so potent were its contents considered that mere possession of the book was believed to prevent fires. I thought that was interesting. This is from Joshua Trachtenberg, Jewish Magic and Superstition, published in 1939. Seems that Eleazar Rokiach of Worms, one of these proposed authors, lived in the years 1160 to 1237. There is certainly no evidence to support the theory that the Sepher Raziel was actually written over 5,000 years ago. There are, however, references to the Sepher Raziel in several scholarly texts establishing a certain amount of validity to its claim to antiquity, dating it at least as far back as the 13th century. The introduction of the ancient Hebrew grimoire, the Sword of Moses, states that the so-called Sepher Raziel, or the book delivered to Adam by the angel Raziel shortly after he had left paradise. It is of composite character. The result, but there is no criterion for the age of the component parts. The result of this uncertainty is that it has been ascribed to R. Eliezer of Worms, who lived about the middle of the 13th century. It is hard to separate which portion is due to his own ingenuity and which may be due to ancient texts utilized by him. Trachtenberg states, who we just heard from a minute ago, a quote from him, "The long list of magical incantations in such a work as Sepher Raziel are proof of the arduous training that the novice in magic must undergo if he would learn how to direct all the memunium, Hebrew for in charge of or appointed to, of air, wind, date, time, place, etc., master of the elements basically, which can control a situation at a given moment. In folklore in the Old Testament, J.G. Fraser notes he, Noah, learned how to make the ark from a holy book. We talked about this a lot before in the prior videos, which have been given to Adam by the archangel Raziel, and which contain within it all knowledge, human and divine. It was made of sapphires. Yes, this sapphire reference. And Noah enclosed it in a golden casket when he took it with him into the ark, where it served him as a timepiece to distinguish night from day. For so long as the flood prevailed, neither the sun nor the moon shed any light on the earth." So it kind of reminds me of the emerald tablets in a sense, but except for emerald, it's sapphire. The Book of Raziel. Part of the mythos of that is that there was an inscription on the sapphire. Very cool stuff. The Book of Raziel, said to have been taught to Adam by the angel Raziel and also to Noah, is a compilation probably of various writers. In Hebrew myths, the Book of Genesis, Robert Graves and Raphael Patay claim that Solomon is said to have won much of his wisdom from the Book of Raziel, a collection of astrological secrets cut on a sapphire, which the angel Raziel kept. The idea of a divine book containing cosmic secrets appears first in the Slavonic Book of Enoch, which states that God had written books of wisdom, or according to another version, dictated them to Enoch. That he then appointed the two angels Samuel, or Raguel, or Semel and Raziel, to accompany Enoch back from heaven to earth, and commanded him to give these books to his children and children's children. This may well be the origin of the Book of Raziel, which according to Jewish tradition was given by the angel Raziel to Adam, from whom it descended through Noah, Abraham, Jacob, Levi, Moses, and Joshua until it reached Solomon. According to the Targum on Ecclesiastes X20, each day the angel Raziel, standing upon Mount Horeb, proclaims the secrets of men to all mankind, and his voice reverberates around the world. The so-called Book of Raziel, dating from about the 12th century, was probably written by the Kabbalist Elazar ben Judah of Worms, but contains far older mythical beliefs. So that's interesting. Talking about the angel Raziel standing upon a mountain, the Mount Horeb, proclaiming the secrets to all mankind. This is kind of in line with Jesus when they talk about Jesus. You know, he said the truth will be proclaimed from the mountaintops, from the rooftops. Everything will come to light. So everyone, I think I'm going to go ahead and end the video there. I think I got a lot of good material. We're at about 39 minutes now, packed into this video. Thank you for being patient and bearing with me as I go through all these notes. I pour through all this stuff, and we'll definitely continue this series because I think there's a lot of cool information to be had. Deeper knowledge about the Book of Raziel and the multiple books of Raziel, as I'm now learning, because I was confused at first. I thought they were all just one thing, and they were people published their own version of it, but no, it's actually different manuscripts. So now that confusion's kind of been cleared up, so we'll probably either get back into this subject in the next video, or we will we will get into Archangel Gabriel, because I want to start covering that as well. For those of you who, my close circle, who are reading my book, who have been a part of that process, I've taken somewhat of a break from that. I've been focusing more on other things, and just taking my time and building up notes for this, doing more of my own learning, my own research, so that I can have a fuller understanding, so that I can hopefully relay this information and all these messages in a better way. So, hope everyone's doing well. Peace, love, and blessings. Take care. Have a beautiful day, and until next time, can't wait to see you.